Now, the cost of repairs to the old Assembly Chamber, which is one of the oldest buildings in Parliament, and the National Assembly, the main debating chamber that was gutted by the fire, is yet to be released. And according to the chairperson of South Africa's National Council of Provinces, Mr. Amos Masondo, the gutted National Assembly occupies an important place in the history and, of course, the evolution of our constitutional democracy. Masondo says that over 2,000 transformative pieces of legislation have been passed there since the end of apartheid and South Africa's system of racial segregation. And the complex also houses some 4,000 pieces of artwork. So to help us unpack the impact of the historic nature of the buildings and some of the artifacts kept there, we join now by historian and academic Professor Pitika Ntuli. Professor, good morning. Thanks so much for speaking to us. Good to have you here on Morning Live.
Thank you very much. Good to have a conversation with you, and also thank you to the listeners.
So, I must say, when I first saw the images, I was first just, caught by surprise, couldn't believe that this was our parliament going up in flames. But what was your first reaction when you saw this?
And when I saw it, I just saw the whole looming figure of the bishop who just been recently buried. That is happening to where his spirit had been actually residing. That's one of the first things that actually happened. And then the next thing to say, how safe is the president, the cabinet, and everybody that works there, because I was not even sure it was day or night. It was very confusing and very, very threatening for something to happen in such an august building.
So just to think about the history that is contained within those walls, the halls of that particular august house, as you say, looking at that and, of course, what has disappeared in that fire. Let's talk to that and your take on it.
The pieces that are actually there, some of them date back to the 17th century. Actually, even for the time when Jan van Riebeeck, arrived, here. And it has been more of a colonial as well as an apartheid, legacy. But that has undergone now change since the new democracy. And even during the anti-apartheid, struggle, that a lot of anti-apartheid artworks that were collected by people all over the world, some of them ended up as part of that, 4,000. But for me, the most significant, part of it is the case camera, tapestry, which is 123 meters long, which is modeled against the Berg's, tapestry in the 11th century. That spelled the Norman conquest of England. So this case camera one tells the history of the Eastern Cape, the life of the San people, the life of the Xhosa people, using oral tradition, folklore, and everything to spell out that history. Very, very formidable work, and I think artist and Dr. Carol Hofmeyer also need to be congratulated for that community work where she got 100 women from the Eastern Cape to put that fantastic work of art.
So we told about the artwork that is housed there in Parliament, 4,000 artworks, other items of value and collections, as you point out, some of it dating as far back as the 17th century. The significance of that to us as a nation, because we do find ourselves now at a point where, for example, the EFF is suggesting Parliament should not spend funds on rebuilding or restoring what has been burned down, but rather relocate. But just in terms of the significance of our history contained within those walls that has gone up in flames, what is it about this that should concern us as South Africans?
I mean, it's very, very concerning that the EFF should say that those buildings should not be done. They should be moved in somewhere else. Those buildings are historical themselves. The architecture is historical itself, but it's also very, very artistic. It has got to be repaired. And it's also lucky that there was a firewall to the library. Otherwise, it would have been far much more devastating. And if the EFF was saying, okay, there should be another move to build a new museum, just like the Senegalese have done to build a museum of ancient history, then we'll be talking about it, because the statues, colonial artwork that people do not want could become part and parcel of a wider, kind of a museum that will host this research material for universities, for schools, for everybody, even for tourists.
So speaking to some of the colonial artifacts, in particular, some of the statues that we have seen across the country vandalized, and we often speak of those that occupy more prominent space and place, but even if you go to smaller towns, quite a number of these have been vandalized. Why should we keep them? Because I think we often take for granted, Prof, that people understand why these are significant and why they should be kept, because the argument could be this is a reminder of a painful colonial past. Why should we keep it?
Well, I think once you start forgetting what is bad that has happened, you'll end up doing the very bad thing that that you have forgotten. You see? On the contrary, instead of us putting up our own new democratic thing, let me give you an example. In the same way as Carol Hofmeyer put in 100 women to do that kind of a tapestry, we have set up a number of people to build our history in stone, building monuments, almost about 15 more than life-size monuments that we have actually built for that, but none of them can actually even be seen up onto the street because of how we understand or misunderstand art. The fact that there are 4,000 pieces of artwork, some of them including statues there, digitized and whatever, that's a history, something that actually happened. And we need actually to learn a lot out of it, in the same sense that I argue that we should have an institution or a center for apartheid studies, so that people all over the world could know what happens if at all people misuse very good, ideas, separating people. So those 4,000 are just a reminder. That's the history of where we have come from and what things we did right, what things we did wrong. And when you look at those, I spent time again yesterday through the website looking at the amount of work that is there. Some of the most beautiful, artworks, that are there. I'm just happy that they are not, destroyed. There are also, films, that are there, photographs, a range of creative things, designs, powerful legislations, poems that you're going to find in there that were written, by hand. So it's a very, 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 very celebratory way of looking at how a human mind functions and works and creates and gives meaning to our own existence and uplift our spirits.
I couldn't help but think also, Prof, whether rightly or wrongly, people will make up their minds, but about whether there is any spiritual significance to what we are seeing. I remember having a conversation with political analyst Koko Obri Machikwe last year when we saw all of the fires during that July uprising. Then we saw the fire at Charlotte Matleke, for example, at the hospital here in Johannesburg. And he spoke about more fires and looking at what is happening right now. And I know that you are also a spiritualist, you're a traditional healer. Just tapping into the spiritual side of things, what is happening? What are we seeing here?
I've been having a lot of conversations with Aubrey. Is that our starting point in our conversation with him? We went back to visit the ideas of Credo Mutua, who has been warning that because we've turned our backs on our spirituality, turned our backs on our own sculptures, we turn our back even on our own languages, we are bound to have fires burning. We are bound to have floods. There is something spiritually that is not actually happening. While up at the same time, you see how many young professional women are turning into spirituality to become healers. Other people say it's a fashion. It's not a fashion. It is a state of what is exactly happening. Spirit is manifesting itself. It's not also surprising that the art exhibition as Amos Masondo that we had put in virtually, that was addressing the issues of spirituality, had to beat 116 other nominees to be voted as one of the two people's choice, because people who voted globally realized the need for spirit. And South Africa needs spirit more than any other. We have been so highly Christianized to a point that we want to turn back from our culture. We don't like our language. We don't like anything about about ourselves. So the colonial mind still exists. And the manifestation of spirit that Obrimashikli so brilliantly speaks about is a fact, it's a reality, it is something that needs to be looked into and to be addressed.
So just as a final thought, in terms of moving forward, we have seen what has happened, this latest fire, and just in terms of making sure that we preserve, seeing that there's been a second flare-up from the initial fire, what should we do? How best should we as a nation go about preserving our heritage, especially when it comes to the arts and artifacts and whatever else we would compartmentalize into that category?
What we are talking about, everybody now and again, we hear everybody speaking about the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution is a quantum revolution. It is a revolution of connectivity. It's a revolution of digitization. That library, can be, digitized. The paintings, everything can be, digitized and protected. That's one of the ways in which we can do. In the same way as you could sit around and digitize a 95-year-old woman speaking spirituality, for the future. So we are in a position where we can have to use, in a sense, our science to protect our spirits, to protect our art, to protect our religion, to protect practically everything that we are about. So Parliament and all other people, institutions, would need to be firewalled in order to prevent that fire. The warning with the burning of the fire on Table Mountain and the one around actually UCT are some of those matters that concern us. But something I cannot resist, a young poet that I'm mentoring, Felix de Villiers, was saying that when an old person dies, it's like a library burning down. Then he said when the Archbishop died, it was a library burning down. And that actually in itself, that's another spiritual person that had actually died. It links to the conversation and the question that we have actually raised.
Well, no doubt we'll talk more, but thanks so much and all the best for the new season. Historian and academic Professor Pitika Ntuli helping us to understand and unpack the impact and the historic nature of the buildings and some of the artifacts following a fire that engulfed the old Assembly Chamber, one of the oldest buildings in Parliament, and of course the National Assembly, the main debating chamber, on Sunday. And that's where we are going to park it. For our SABC2 viewers, thanks so much for being with us this morning. It's been great to be back and grateful to have all of you back with us